3008, to give it a basic term, is a survival horror game. However, there's more to this game that I think separates it from others. The building mechanic, while prevalent in most survival games, is given a unique spin in 3008 by making it furniture that you can place practically anywhere, and I think this gives the players a lot more creativity. Instead of walls and doors, you put up beds, pallets, and wardrobes to protect you from the elements, or the monsters. The concept or lore of 3008 actually comes from SCP, which you might have guessed by the SCP logo and the icon of the game, and the fact that you probably know what SCP is. However, I need to extend the video length as much as I can, so in case you don't know what SCP is, it's this organization that secures, contains, and protects weird entities that they find. Each entity is given a number, supposedly in order of when they find them. This means that 3008 would supposedly be the 3000th and 8th SCP ever discovered. This also means that there are over 3,000 other SCPs, which are actually documented. You might wonder how someone writes the lore for each of the thousands of SCPs, and that's because each SCP is actually a submission from a random person on the internet. One of these submissions is yours truly, 3008, a seemingly never-ending IKEA that has strange, deformed employees that try to kill you during the night. And I'm gonna be honest, I used to play this game all the time before I started making videos, yet replaying it kinda reminds me when I stopped, which I'll go over later in the video. But why is this game so captivating for so many players? It's got a pretty neat premise, but nothing in life is ever as simple as that. This game has lasted longer than I expected it to, so they had to do something right. I mean, a game with this big of a player base after 5 years is pretty damn impressive. But let's try to break down how it got this success. First of all, the game is simple and easy to pick up. With most other games, you gotta learn the in-depth mechanics that meticulously connect throughout a complex system that makes the game play the way it does. However, in 3008, you can just join, and all you really need to know is right in front of you. Health, better make sure you don't lose any. Hunger and energy, better make sure I eat food. And of course, if everything turns dark and a faceless creature runs towards you from the darkness, talking to you in a distorted voice, one could possibly surmise that they need to run away, especially once the employee reaches them and the health bar starts going downwards. Of course, things have changed a little with recent updates, such as objectives in the tutorial, which I'll talk about later. You could argue that this tutorial isn't necessary, as there isn't much you need to know, and it's rather easy to figure out. But then again, I can imagine there's a group of people big enough that were confused upon joining to warrant a tutorial. I have my own gripes about how they executed it, but this is the good section, so only positive thoughts for now. I believe the game also benefits off its association with the SCP universe. Most people, including me, have had a phase, or are still in a phase, where they were really into SCP and would consume any related media. It's not like other SCP games where it takes place in one of the facilities, and I kinda like that. Being unique is a good thing, as long as it makes your thing better than the thing you're being unique from, and I think 3008 is better. The SCP facility games never really seemed very interesting to me, especially the ones on Roblox. You kinda just wait around in a facility, lollygagging until someone breaks something because they're bored. I think it's also good that every player in 3008 is on the same level. There's no guards, scientists, or even D classes. Everyone is just a survivor. And I think this makes people more friendly towards each other. Not every game has to be about killing other players, and I like 3008 for this. Roblox needs more games where players work together and are encouraged to interact with each other. And speaking of which, I love interacting with other players in games like this, or at least I used to. I don't have any proof since it was so long ago, but I remember teaming up with someone I met in game to make a huge tower. It was a great memory, although I feel like people on Roblox are a lot less social nowadays, which indirectly ruins this game. Don't quote me on this though, my only evidence is feelings and vibes. But on a separate note, I really like the building in this game. I know I talked about this in the intro, but I'd like to talk about it more here. I wholeheartedly believe that this game is kinda carried by the building mechanic. Most, or even all the fun of the game is building things, or collecting the right pieces of furniture for it. And last but not least, I really love the atmosphere. The fog, the soundtrack, the sound design, and even the little camera and particle effects really add a lot to the game. And the soundtrack is surprisingly expansive. It mostly sounds pretty similar, but it can also sound so different. It sounds like something you would hear when going through a furniture store. And the fact that it's all copyright free means I can put it in the background of the video, and maybe future ones. I know it's a little early to worry about monetization, but it's good to get out of the habit of using copyrighted music early. However, the game seems to be a bit lacking in certain aspects. You know how I praise this game for being simple? Well, it's kinda too simple. All the cool building is only done because you're bored. It feels less like a horror game and more like a sandbox, like Minecraft. However, there's no real reason to expand your base like in Minecraft. In Minecraft, you need to expand your base in order to fit all the important stuff like crafting tables, chests, furnaces, and beds. 3008 doesn't have any of that, and the most valuable thing you'll find is something like a GameCube, which is only valuable for its rarity. If I wanted to collect stuff that served no other purpose other than just being rare, I'd play Souls RNG. If you're sad and miserable, like me, you could build a box to hide in and think, wow, this game doesn't have a lot to do. I know that sometimes you gotta make your own fun, kind of like that one episode of SpongeBob with a piece of paper, but it's nice to have a road to your shop rather than making people look for it. I also feel like the lack of any sort of saving feature on buildings is really disappointing. You could spend hours on something that you're super proud of, just for it to all be erased from existence the moment the server dies, and you are reminded of your insignificance in this world, and that your existence on this planet has so little impact on the grand scheme of the universe, they might as well not exist. The way I wanted to implement a saving feature is rather complicated though, and there's multiple different ways you could tackle this situation, which I'll go over later. But I do think that something like this could further encourage building bigger and cooler bases, which is another aspect of the game I really like, but sadly is held back by the lack of the saving feature. But outside of building, the activities you have to do are objectives, which piqued my interest at first until I actually finished one. The reward for completing all 3 objectives is nothing.
Is that it? Just good job?
Let me ask you something. What is the point of objectives? They don't give you anything at all. They don't even give you anything that's useless. You literally just say, good job, and that's it. Unless you listen to mommy ASMR and enjoy people pretending to be proud of you, I don't see this system being gratifying. The objectives themselves are pretty underwhelming as well. There's picking up a pizza, picking up the same item a bunch of times, and walking. Sure, there's more interesting ones like reaching a certain altitude and pushing employees, but what's the point of the lamer ones? What is the challenge in picking up any piece of furniture 16 times? The game is literally encouraging you to sit there and hold E on an object for 1 or 2 minutes. I can kind of understand when it makes you interact with a specific piece of furniture you might not have, and you gotta go out and find it, but this doesn't really apply to food. People stockpile that stuff like it's life juice, because it kinda is. People have been gathering food together like this for thousands of years. What makes you think that finding a food in this situation, when a player decides they're well off enough to start doing objectives, is a challenge whatsoever? It feels like the developer just added more objective types because they just needed more, and not because they were actually fun. At the very least, it rewards you with absolutely nothing. The only reason I did objectives was because I had to see what it did for the video, and it made the footage moderately more interesting compared to if I had just done nothing the entire night, and for no other reasons whatsoever. But on a different note, this game is really buggy. I don't think I've ever gone a single session without someone clipping into the ground somehow. Then there's also the buggy employee AI. I don't think there was much thought put into it other than just run towards the player and hit them, and I think you can see what I'm talking about. Some bugs include crouching and clipping into a pallet, bouncing up and down on the ramp to the degree of taking fall damage, and employees mistaking the player for a trampoline. But on another unrelated note, let's rewind a little bit. During the good section, I brought up the tutorial and said I'll talk about it later. Well, here I am, and I think out of every way you could have done a tutorial, this is probably the worst possible way you could have done it. It's invasive and inefficient. It's still the same random spawn, but they added a slideshow full of text. A slideshow full of text. I don't think you fully understand just how horrendous this is. The disappointment I felt when I saw this sad excuse for a tutorial could rival the report of the week trying out Popeye's cheddar biscuit butterfly shrimp for the first time. A text-filled slideshow is the worst way to do a tutorial. I've brainstormed for a while, and I couldn't possibly come up with a worse way to implement a tutorial other than a 2-hour meaningless slog. Cough cough. Red Dead Redemption 2. Cough cough. But I think even then, the 2-hour slog is better because it actually tries to teach you something and tries to engage you into the story, or whatever the game's about. It actually shows the player what the mechanics are by actually putting them in that situation where those mechanics are relevant. If the player is given a text dump at the beginning of a game, they're way less likely to remember the information they were given. When people hit play on a game, they actually want to play the game and not do tutorial. The last thing they want to do is read 6 paragraphs that explains some of the base mechanics of the game. Hell, I don't have footage of this, but when I got one of my friends to play, they just closed the tutorial pop-up and made me explain the game to them. There's a reason games don't come with instructions manuals anymore. It's not the 90s anymore. Hell, I ripped on Decaying Winter for having a wall of text for all the keybinds, but I think that this might be worse. At least in Decaying Winter it showed you everything. 3008 fails to mention objectives. Wait, no, it does mention them. You just gotta read. But as I said, people don't like reading, and neither do I. I take it back actually, this game's tutorial is better than Decaying Winters because it actually exists. Moving on though, I'd like it if more objects had some sort of utility that made them actually useful. Sure, lights are pretty useful, and beanbags apparently prevent fall damage, but why not more? I'll go over some of my ideas later in the video. But lastly, it's kinda just annoying when you run out of energy and can't do anything. There's no nearby food and you can't sprint, so you have to slog your way around the map to hopefully find food that'll give you plus 10 energy, so you can sprint for another 30 seconds to hopefully find more plus 10 energy. I know you're supposed to conserve your energy by saving it for more important encounters and whatnot, but it's still annoying nonetheless. Overall, the game could use a little work. Then again, it does have almost 30,000 recurring players, so what do I know about game design? Everyone likes different games. Some people like more challenging games, and some people like more casual games. And I feel like this game leans more towards the casual side. But for my personal opinion, I'd have to give it the area of this shape out of 10. The first person to get the answer right gets their comment pinned. But enough complaining, what would I do to fix the problems I mentioned? Keep in mind that these are just my ideas, and if you don't agree with them, say why in the comments. It's always good to hear y'all's opinions as well, and maybe even your own ideas to make the game better. Or ideas to make my ideas to make the game better, and hopefully I can give ideas on your ideas for my ideas to make your ideas for my ideas better for my ideas for the original developers. A feedback loop, basically. But first things first, what would be the best way to implement a saving system into 2008? I've brainstormed this for quite a bit, so I think I'll go over some of the ideas I had. The first one I had was something similar to Town. There's like less than a 1% chance that you know what Town is, so let me explain. In Town, you select a spot to put your plot, and then you can save whatever you build, so you can load it back up whenever you rejoin. This would let people access their builds on any server, but I could also see problems arise and entire buildings pop up out of nowhere. But I got a better idea, and that idea is Minecraft-style worlds. Basically, you create a world, everything in the world is saved, and it's always going to be there when you join back. There might have to be some sort of plot system like in most Minecraft servers, where you select a certain area that only you can move stuff in, but I'm not entirely sure if it'll fit with the rest of the game. I think another thing that would help with this idea is the version archives the game has, as a world made during a previous update of the game would be erased otherwise, completely ruining the point of this feature in the first place. But on a different note, I think it'd be cooler if employees actually post a threat, even after building a box to hide in. Perhaps some objects are breakable by employees, leaving you vulnerable. Of course, this is a pretty drastic change and would definitely have to have some sort of fine-tuning for it to be fair, but I also like to see cooler ways of fighting back. Instead of just pushing them, maybe actually let us pick up the crowbar and hit them. Some sort of simple combat system will make the game far more interesting. People in the actual lore of SCP-3008 actually do this. They fight off employees using makeshift spears and other weapons, while the employees attempt to break down their barricades. Although, I must acknowledge that such a change would practically make an entirely new game, and people aren't really huge fans of changes that completely change how the entire game is played. However, I don't think I'm alone in saying that 3008 needs something to make it more interesting. However, the developer has come out and said to stop suggesting weapons. I can't find the exact tweet, and I only saw said tweet from another guy's video on the game, but I'm just gonna assume that the developer 100% said that. Looking at the tweets in the guy's video, which I'll leave in the description, the tweets seem to be dismissive or straightforwardly opposed to the idea, although they never really specify why. They could have said, I don't think weapons would be a good addition to the game because part of the horror is how little you can do once the employees catch up to you, and adding weapons would make the game even more trivial than it already is, and would take away from the horror aspects. But they opted for I know no wanna instead. However, he did kind of make up for this by creating a poll, and a pretty big majority said they wanted weapons. The biggest majority, however, said it should be PvP only, and I have to agree with that. PvP would make players more hostile towards each other, and part of the charm of 3008 is how friendly people usually are. However, this poll was 2 years ago, and this developer seems competent enough to implement a simple combat system within that amount of time, so the only explanation is that they still don't want to. As a developer, you have to take into account the vision of the players versus the vision of the developer. You may originally want to make a horror game with some building and survival elements, but if the players think it'd be more interesting for it to lean into the survival aspect, then who are you to deny them? If the players aren't satisfied with what you're doing in the game, they might as well stop playing. But real quick, check out Root Awakening's video on the game. I derived a few of my points off of his, and it's only fair I give him credit. I agree with basically everything he says, The weapons, points in the lore, and crafting are all things I liked from his video, so go check him out. For an additional note, I'd also like to be able to repair furniture. Each piece of furniture could have a sort of health bar that would be damaged by employees in an attempt to get to you. Some sort of hammer or duct tape that could repair them would add another interesting layer to the game in my opinion, especially if they do add employees damaging furniture. Also, I'm not sure how crafting would work, as the idea is so loose and could be interpreted in so many different ways. Each game has a different crafting system, and it'd be a bit difficult to find one that suits 3008. However, one system that I think would fit the best is seen in another Sandbox game. It's got a blocky and pixelated art style, uses blocks for its main building mechanic, and it's very unlikely you haven't heard of it. Is Terraria. You see, in Terraria, you can open your inventory and all the different items you can craft with the items in your inventory are displayed, and if certain crafting stations are nearby that lets you craft new items, they will be displayed as well. This would also mean that 3008 would have to implement different materials for crafting as well as crafting stations, but Ugly Burger Zero seems competent enough to implement them. I think Terraria has the most simple and easy to pick up crafting systems out of most popular survival games, as long as you don't take into account the recipes for these items. One thing that 3008 should probably include if they do add something like this is an in-game menu including all the crafting recipes in the game, kind of like Cube Cavern. Remember Cube Cavern? I haven't played that thing forever. I think it'd be neat if you could use items like the microwaves or the ovens to heat up food and make them grant more hunger or energy. But moving on, the tutorial. This is not how you do it. I think just having the instructions pop up when relevant, kind of like in Left 4 Dead. I know I've said this in almost every video now, but bear with me. Although, if you were to add some sort of actual combat besides pushing, that would definitely make the game more complicated. But even then, the relevant keybinds and instructions and whatnot would still be way preferable to the slideshow. For instance, instead of shoving a slideshow in the player's face, provide them with pop-ups that show what each individual item does on their screen, no matter how far away it is. I'm kidding, of course, but it'd be better if certain things had a pop-up to give the player a better understanding of what the thing does. And now, for something completely different. What if, bear with me, objectives gave you money? Stay with me here. What if there's also things like vending machines that you could spend money on to get food, and the vending machines in question could be moved, acting as a portable source of hunger and energy restoration at the cost of needing to find a vending machine, as well as the hypothetical money from objectives. I like this because it would be a rare item that people look for that would actually be useful, unlike the GameCube that's kind of just a novelty item. I think some other cool items would be the jukebox, which plays music for a bit that distracts employees if you put a little money in it, or maybe it gives passive energy regeneration to nearby players if you're feeling adventurous. And cake dispenser. It's super rare, but you can put money in it to get a cake, which restores a bunch of hunger and energy when you eat it. Or you could just have objectives grant you XP for a meaningless level up system that serves no other purpose than showing off to other players. I'd also like it if you could maybe sit or crouch down on furniture like chairs or beds to slowly regain energy. It would have to be a small amount though, so you don't make sodas useless. I know how much people get mad when I make a suggestion that I unknowingly would break the entire game's balance with. One more piece of furniture I think I'd like to see is a trampoline. I think it'd be fun to bounce around, and maybe even incorporate it into your base's design. And I know someone said that it's cool that they don't have this, but you could also add door frames. You could interact with them to open and close them, and it would have more function than just being wall material, and could also add more cool functionality to your base. One more item is the calendar. You would use the calendar to see upcoming events, such as food resupply, foggy days, and blood moons. This could add a more strategic element to the game, and let players plan for random events in advance. You could also just make energy passively regenerate like it does in literally every other game to ever exist, except for this one for some reason. Also, one thing I think would help bring people together is player coordinates. If you're trying to find your friend or some guy in chat, they could say what their coordinates are, and you could walk right to them. It helps you meet up with and socially interact with people in the game, which I think is good. But there's one last thing I want to say. It's a pretty big one, but it's been on my mind for a while. A custom game mode where everyone spawns in the same area and they have a limited amount of time to set up defenses against a horde of employees. In this game mode, employees will have to be able to break furniture or else it wouldn't be very interesting. The simple combat system might also make this mode more interesting, but a lack thereof would also encourage players to build better defenses. If my memory serves me correctly, there's another YouTuber who did something like this as a sort of event he hosted while streaming. The concept of having a limited amount of time to build the best defense you can to fight off the employees and other monsters that can break stuff seemed really interesting to me, and I'd like to see it outside of just something one YouTuber does for fun. But that's about it for 3008. I think I've stretched out the video as much as reasonably possible. I could try and go for longer, but I don't think I have that kind of energy for one video. However, you might have noticed, but I did try to make this video longer than my other videos. But the problem with some other games is that there's just not a lot to talk about with them, and I just had stuff I wanted to say about 3008. Hell, this script is nearing 5,000 words, and none of my other videos have reached nearly that long. But honestly, this game has plenty of players, so something had to work. Maybe they don't need to change anything. Maybe I'm just a fool. But what do you think? Are my suggestions acceptable? Am I a fool for even thinking for a second that any of these could possibly, in any universe, be a decent addition to the game? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And since you made it this far into the video, you might as well like, subscribe, and vow a blood oath in my name. It's the least you could do. But anyways, that's all I have to say for today. See you soon, raccoons.